one or possibly two trains a day, and loads going out. And then it would move over Cumbres Pass down into Durango, and it required a crew out of Alamosa, and then a crew out of Chama, and then another crew out of Durango up the branch. And at Farmington, they had pipe unloading facilities to handle this, and they went through basically the same type of procedure that we did at Alamosa.
Without the passenger train plowing the line twice daily in the winter, the railroad was forced to run its rotary snowplows more frequently to keep the line open.
Just running a rotary snowplow train is just unbelievable. And if it were possible to, by operating at once, keep the line open, that would be fine. But invariably, you'd open up the line, and within 3 or 4 weeks to be closed again. You have to go through all that expense again. Meantime, you've got the revenue maybe off of 2 or 3 trains was all. And it just self-defeating.
After the pipe was gone, we finally got to the point for a little while after the pipe movement, 1 train a day, and then bi-weekly, then get down to 1 day a week. And finally we got down, we were just running trains when we could build up enough to pay for it.
On September 18, 1967, the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad at long last filed a petition for abandonment with the Interstate Commerce Commission. The Rio Grande wished to close the narrow gauge line from Antonito through Chama to Durango. Also included was the branch to Farmington, New Mexico. It seemed to all observers that the narrow gauge had finally made its last run into the sunset. By July 1970, the narrow gauge railroad over Cumbres Pass had been officially abandoned. The yards in Chama were silent. The railroad between Durango and Chama was already being removed. The line from Chama to Antonito, however, was intact, and the scrapper stayed away. This section of the route was to be preserved because of a number of people whose dedication to the railroad in 1968 would not let the line die.
We decided that we better get busy on trying to preserve the railroad if we wanted to preserve part of it. So we approached the National Park Service and ran a special train for these people from the National Park Service in November 1968, all the way from Durango to Chama with an overnight stay, and then continuing on to Alamosa. National Park Service was favorably impressed by the railroad and by the scenery it passed through. And it seemed like it was just going to take too long for the Park Service to come up with funds to save the railroad. We decided to approach the states of Colorado and New Mexico, see if there was a possibility there. And so legislation was introduced into the legislature of New Mexico and Colorado, starting in 1969, I believe. And this was quite a project to get 2 states to join in the purchase of something, much less a railroad. The big day was the 16th of July, 1970, when the check for $500-some thousand was taken by Terry Ross up to the Denver and Rio Grande up in Denver for the actual purchase of the railroad. So on that day in 1970, it was ours. The taxpayers of New Mexico and Colorado owned the railroad.
The 2 states did indeed own a railroad, one that had no employees and had not been used in nearly 2 years. A large contingent of volunteers took it upon themselves to ready the track for the first train. Throughout this summer, work continued to reopen the line from Antonito to Chama. It was hard work, but the volunteers had a sense of purpose. Everyone believed that their efforts would be very worthwhile. On September 2nd, 1970, the first train of the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad departed Antonito behind engine 483, and the two states were in the railroad business. The two states are still in the railroad business today, although the day-to-day operations have been turned over to Kyle Railways. The entire railroad is a true railway museum. The yards and Chama demonstrate this quite well. Located here are the facilities that were used when the railroad was in day-to-day operation. Structures such as the old depot, the coal tower where the locomotives were fueled, and the bunkhouse are all longtime parts of the Chama yard. Most of the freight cars are wooden and date from the turn of the century. The K-36 locomotives, numbered in the 480s, were built as narrow-gauge locomotives in 1925 and have seen service on this section of the Rio Grande since the 1930s. Today, in the new engine shop, one can still watch craftsmen use techniques from the age of steam.
I'm cleaning these holes so our superheated fuel will fit in there. And these holes are a little bit cracked and a little bit rough, so I'm cleaning them with our fuel will fit in there.
One of the problems associated with operating a living museum like the Cumbres and Toltec is the fact that one is using the very items that are supposed to be preserved.
There's different ways to preserve things, and with steam locomotives, really, the best way to preserve one is to operate it and keep it maintained and keep it in good condition. I suppose that some people would disagree with that and prefer to put them in museums and on a pedestal and just look at them, but it's just not the same thing. You just can't get the feel of it and really understand what it's all about unless you can see one operate.
When I refer to this entire project as a living museum, what we have here is a railroad doing today what it was designed to do 100 years ago when it was built. We are still running trains as they were run then. Though we're hauling a lot more people now than they did then, and we're not hauling any freight. The factory trains we have is doing today what it was designed to do. The place is here, the equipment is in place, the buildings are in place, all along the line.
One such place is the former section camp at Cumbres. Time, however, has not been kind here. For example, when the two states bought the line, the old snow shed was intact.
The old snow shed, there was no maintenance done on it for years by the railroad. And unfortunately, a few years ago, a portion of it fell down. There's a bare remnant of it. There simply isn't the money at this point. Hence, hopefully, someday again, the volunteers will have some influence in perhaps restoring what now are, well, the brakeman's house is virtually in ruins. When the railroad walked away from those things, they just left them. And they have simply, the weather, particularly at 10,000 feet, the winters are rough. And unless structures of that kind are maintained carefully, they won't survive the winter.
It is hoped that, in time, measures can be taken that will restore Cumbres to the appearance that one would expect from a museum. Despite the condition of decay that is found at the summit, there is a good restoration effort currently in place on the railroad. A volunteer group known as the Friends of the C&TS Railroad is making much progress in reversing the deterioration of the last years of Rio Grande operation.
We're trying to fulfill the role of the museum aspect of the property, including those jobs that are not done by the operator. We have an excellent operator here now who maintains everything they use, and they do a fine job of that. But there are hundreds of railroad